Hey, what's up, boys? So, global patch notes. I've already looked through it. I already have the document that I had last time for patch notes with like all my insights on it, and it's looking pretty good. Global is looking pretty hype, and it's looking hella good. So, don't want to waste too much time here. Some really noteworthy ones, some that we can just like lean on a little bit. So, dynamic co-op events. So, for global, we are gonna get the dynamic co-op event, which is really good. It's the thing that I described before as very like Guild Wars 2-esque when it comes to like these dynamic events, which is really good. And I would actually like to really see peace events get replaced by dynamic by these co-op events, because I think they're a lot more satisfying. You're least likely to get trolled, and it's a lot less frustrating, especially for PvE players that just want to do an event and kind of like have a good time, you know what I mean? So that's really good. Leveling, progression, and gear. So they're going to have more direction for new players, which is always good, because I feel like a lot of new players are lost between contracts, sometimes exploration codexes and all that. And so this update is actually live in KR right now. If you make a new character, you'll see it. Once you run out of once you get to the bottleneck for your main story quest, it will start to direct you to certain places that you need to do, so you can start catching up in terms of XP, and you can start continuing the MSQ again, right? They just made a lot of updates right now that make it less bloated, less clutter, less stuff that will overwhelm a new player. So that's also really good. That means we're gonna get good retention if that pans out. And then this one is I'm a bit confused in this one though. The find a balance that serves both hardcore and less hardcore audiences. Unfortunately, we can't really get any or glean any insight from KR on this one, because again, KR, all the milestones are already open, so we don't really know how Amazon is planning on pacing this one. The one guess that I have is potentially have milestones open a little bit earlier. That way, high-level players can start doing high-level content a lot faster, and they don't have to compete with like the lower level players that are just starting out. So that would also be good, but that would only be effective at launch though. As soon as all the milestones are open, it's not gonna matter anymore. But yeah, this one during open beta, leveling was sped up to allow players for more time to test endgame content. These changes have been reverted to ensure that the leveling speed and power progression will be at the intended pace for launch. So this pretty much confirms that we're gonna get the current KR build. We were always worried about like what leveling update or patch we were gonna get, and this statement right here almost confirms, or almost pretty much like confirms, that we're gonna get the current build in Korea. So that's good. That means like my hard work for the leveling build is not gonna go to waste. And the updated minimum level to engage auction house from 15 to level 40, which is also good. It's good, but it's also kind of like I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure how useful it is, because let's be honest, people are not looking at the auction house at level 15 anyway, so there's no need to introduce it that early. You could probably even introduce it at level 50 and you'll be fine. And then we have the equipment buffs and nerfs. So arc boss weapons and other T1. So this one, basically all the arc boss weapons. I know it sounds bad, like you're gonna see like a base damage decrease by 20% across the board, basically. But the thing is, like, you also have to remember, arc boss weapons now can go from like +9 to +12. So like you can see it here, like base strength decrease from 5 to 4, that is unupgraded, right? So this one right here, the base damage decrease by 20%, is also unupgraded. So the reason why they did this actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because a lot of these arc boss weapons, if somebody were to +12 them really early, it would be very hard to balance if they didn't nerf it at this point in time, especially, right? Because then you'll actually see people getting 2-tapped more often. No, I'm just kidding. So this is really good in terms of balancing across the board, just nerfs and nerfs and nerfs. But compared to like +9, how it was before, going all the way to like +12, it actually ends up being a tiny bit of a late game buff compared to how it was before. It's just that they had to kind of tone it down a little, because how it was before and then getting it to +12 makes it really, really OP. Like just this is an example, right? Like Queen Bellandir, they lowered the shield block chance from 19 to 15. So at like +9, it is technically lower than Nirma, which makes Nirma really, really good. But the thing is, Nirma at +9 is 28% shield block chance. Bellandir at +12 is around 31%. So it kind of makes sense, right? Like Bellandir now is better than Nirma still because of the +12 increase. But the good thing is that it's not as egregious as it was before. Because if they didn't nerf these things in the early mid game, can you imagine like Bellandir giving more than 31% shield block chance? I think everybody would just quit if they see like a sword and shield with Bellandir sword and shield running after them, right? So it makes a lot of sense. A lot of it applies to all these other ones, so you don't have to worry too much. Your overall strength compared to what you were used to before for your arc boss weapons actually ends up being stronger unless you plus 12 at the very moment that it was allowed to get to plus 12. Then you'd probably feel the slight nerf that you got. Well, maybe not like a slight nerf, but like it's still better than what it was at plus 9. It's just not as egregious, right? So that's always good. Balance is good. T1 dungeon and world boss weapon nerfs and changes. So these ones, I mentioned how they boosted or they buffed up the tier 2 weapons and the arc boss weapons, so I think they should revert back to T1. And I've kind of like had this change of heart a little bit when it comes to these T1 nerfs, right? Like we discussed this in the previous patch note, but I think the reason why they nerfed the T1 weapons instead of just like buffing the T2 to make it like more appealing is that I think they're thinking more like long term, right? Because thing is, if you maintain T1 as it is, and if you had to buff T2 to make it more appealing than T1 gear, then you would have to buff T2 by a lot, right? But what happens when eventually you introduce legendary weapons? Are you going to have the same process like repeat, where you can't make them too strong, but then you make tier 2 more appealing, and people are going to stick to tier 2 instead of legendary, for example, right? Like the same thing that people stuck with the good T1s versus tier 2s. And I think them nerfing T1 and therefore not having to buff tier 2 too much when it comes to scaling and making it more viable is kind of like a long-term move, so that they don't have to overbuff the next tier of gear later on in order to make it more appealing. So I think I could be heartily wrong about this one, but I think that's probably the reasoning behind what they are doing. And hopefully it pans out, hopefully it works out, because yeah, I do see the thought like put into it. But yeah, a lot of T1 nerfs for sure. Certain ones like Chernobyls, I just don't understand why they decided to nerf this thing. Like nobody uses this outside of like small skirmishes and 1v1s anyway, but you know, it is what it is, right? And then the T1 set item name changes and nerfs. So the Reaper set, Death set, if a Shadow Harvester now they want to call it, critical damage decreased from 21% to 14%. This is honestly, this is a pretty painful nerf. The other ones, not as bad, right? For crossbow 22 to 18, not as bad. The Grand General one, which is now Shock Commander, DR reduced from 22 to 18. So for DR, you won't even notice it. You know what I mean? It's like we don't really care too much about that DR. We care more that we didn't get nerfed in terms of shield block chance. But yeah, Shadow Harvester / Reaper, definitely feeling the hurt on this nerf. The next one we have here is combat diversity. So really good changes overall for people that did only OBT and didn't get to play Hyper Boost or are not playing KR at the moment. What this is essentially, this is the skill specialization that you've probably heard a lot about at this point. The huge like update that they made. And so if you haven't experienced it yet, I encourage you to try out KR right now, even if it's just like for a day or two. Just look at, or even just go to Questlog. Go to Questlog, look at the builds over there, and just check out the new changes when it comes to like the passives and the specializations, because it makes the game a lot more interesting, and it makes the builds a lot more diverse. More builds are more viable now than they were before, and the only problem that you would probably have with it is you're going to be a lot more indecisive as to what combination you will make or you want to make, which is a good problem to have, because it means like, oh, it's not just the 5 top combinations now. There's actually a lot of new combinations that you can make, and a lot more that are unexplored currently that you could see for yourself or try to discover something new and then introduce that to the meta if you can. So we also have the anti-CC trinket, which is already available in KR. This is also good. The only problem that it has sometimes, I'm not sure if this is just like ping, but sometimes, let's say like against like a greatsword user, if they stun you by the time you use your trinket, they already have like Ascension Slash on you to knock you down. The KD sometimes actually goes through even though you cleanse the stun, because I don't know how it's coded, how it works, but it does happen. And I'm not sure if it's actually just ping. Hopefully it is, and then we'll have like a better result when it comes to like global launch, but you know, hopefully. And then they're also introducing the CC immunity system along with global as well, where all it does is it's going to set a gauge, and once that CC gauge fills up, you'll be immune to CC for a certain amount of time. Problem is, if a greatsword is still just like killing you within like one short combo, chances are you'll still die anyway, unless this happens to work properly, right? So we'll see how it works out. We'll see how it pans out. Maybe as a tank, as a frontline tank, you don't have to suffer too much with when it comes to CC. Like every CC or crowd control will have their own like set number that they're gonna make that gauge grow. So let's say like maybe the gauge is like up to 10, and let's say stun will bring it up to 5, or bind will bring it up to like 4, something like that. So hopefully if you're a frontline tank and they kind of like spam you with CC beforehand, it makes it so you're immune, so you can actually start to push in, right? So that's good. And then controls and camera settings improvements. So this is just a lot of the feedback that they got from the OBT, which is like the camera smoothing stuff. And then now you just have more settings when it comes to that. And then when it comes to like healers, you have more options for your buffs and your heals if you have somebody targeted. And then in response to player feedback, several default settings have been altered to fit the typical playstyle of a wider audience. And that kind of comes into play when you look back into the previous patch, where they just put like lock on target, which is usually pretty common to have in a lot of games, and they made it from like default not having a shortcut into actually having an actual shortcut built into it, right? So that's really good. And then the PvP balance and fairness and dynamic events. So they introduced power scaling in lower level zones, and we're gonna have that in global as well. But I feel like this one came a little too late. It's good to have, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it came a little bit too late because they actually buffed the level 50 events in KR. So I double checked again. Before in the previous patch, the co-op ones were not giving resistance medals, even if they were level 50 events. Now they are, so that's really, really good. But I think a lot of high-level players, once they reach level 50 in like 5-6 hours, right? I think that they will just start to do the level 50 events, and then that's it. Like, they don't care after that, right? Because like, why would you miss out on resistance medals fully knowing that you need 40, and maybe you can get like some good traits out of it that you can use, or, you know, sell even. And just miscellaneous updates that they have here at the very tail end of this one is improved looting rules to allow more fair loot distribution among parties and guilds, remove XP and other loss penalties that occurred after dying, which is really, really good because it makes things a lot less frustrating. If you're a degenerate like me, then you probably wouldn't care, like same way that I kept playing even after all that suffering in the early days of KR. But this is good because then the casual players and all that will be a lot less frustrated and least likely to quit, right? Reduce the buff players receive when entering dungeons through matchmaking feature to 5% damage increase and 5% health increase, which makes a lot of sense because all the weapons got huge PvE buffs in like the past 2 patches alone, right? So this is like an okay thing, I think, because otherwise T1 dungeons are going to be a joke if they actually give the previous values that they were giving, right? So added a guild tag system to allow players to more easily search for guilds with similar playstyles. This is also good. That way every guild can kind of like set the expectations that they have for people that do apply. So then players that are applying are just going to be like, oh, okay, I'm casual, let me just pick the casual tag and I'm gonna join like these like casual guilds. That way I don't accidentally like end up in a hardcore, semi-hardcore guild. Treasure goblins, BDO players probably automatically think of a Faru when it comes to this one. They just have like decent loot. It's the same concept of like a Faru. You just hunt it. They're pretty tanky at the very beginning. And then improve the scoreboards for conquest battles and castle sieges, which is also really, really good, by the way, because now you'll get like this post-match statistic that you just see like all the assists, all the deaths, all the kills, kind of like what you would see in like BDO, except I feel like it looks better and looks cleaner, so that's also good. Added a unique class name to each weapon combination. We don't know what these names are yet, but I am actually very curious to what these names are. Like maybe we'll see a Dark Runner in there or something like that, right? And multiple systems have been tweaked. Most importantly, we've improved the rewards available for dynamic events to better reward players for the effort put into successfully clearing. Same with the previous update. I'm not sure if they're going to add more to that to make it better overall for free-to-play players. I think the current event rewards are pretty good. They're pretty decent, especially with the new medals put into place. More sometimes isn't necessarily better, but as long as it doesn't ruin the balance, I'm all for it, right? And then reduce the requirements for crafting equipment chests that require dimensional shards and abyss currency. So what this one is actually going to do is that it kind of puts more value into the leveling pass, right? Like the one that you're gonna buy for like 500, the 1 to 50 leveling pass, the one that you buy for like 500 lucent, at the very end of it, it actually gives you like 120 like dimensional shards or something like that. So if they reduce the requirements for crafting those equipment chests, that means that now the leveling pass is actually way more bang for your buck compared to before. Even though it's hidden down here in the miscellaneous area, it's actually pretty substantial if it does pan out like that. Expanded the offerings of items available with ornate coins. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it's the ornamental coins that you get for picking up purple lore items across the world. Maybe they'll have more stuff for that, or maybe the contract coin tokens. But we'll see. More stuff for things that you can just explore the game and get for free. Always a good thing, right? So simply put, things are looking good for global. This is something that you would like to see this close to early access or official release, because this is actually pretty hype. If you want to access these patch notes, it's the same document that I used last time. I'll put it in the description. And then as you can see at the bottom here, I still have the 910k patch notes. I will update more and more, kind of like put my insight into it. I encourage other content creators as well to do the same thing and put their own insight into it, right? That way, like, people can see from different perspectives. And then, yeah, peace.